Yeah, hi Al. So till now we have seen some of the data manipulations and also data definition languages regarding with different commands. What will happen with respect to the other languages we are going to be showcased? Something as a transaction control language, where we use mostly this transaction control language to do any kind of the commits or rollback or the save point. So these are some of the you can say the transaction control is going to be used for the managing changes made whenever we require the DML statements to write. So it allows you the statement, maybe the grouping of together into the logical transactions. For example, let's take these DCL commands like commit. Commit is going to be enhanced. It's also used for permanently saved any kind of the transaction into the database. Similarly, the rollback. A rollback is a command where we're going to be restore the database to the last committed state, and it's also used for the save point, the command to jump to the save point in the transaction. Similarly, the save point. So this save point is very helpful. It's also used for some kind of the temporary save your transaction details, and also it's going to be rolled back at the point whenever it's necessary. So these are very straightforward stuff, I can say. While going to be do any kind of the in the SQL query, you can directly write as a commit and also the rollback and save points. So this is straightforward. So let's go and discuss what other different language we had. So we have so four different languages, right? So last one is the data control language, which is basically going to be controlling of the language. The syntax is very similar to whatever we learned in the, some programming language to use access to the database, such as authorization we have seen already. In particular way, I can say it is a component of the structured query language, that is the SQL. So the some simple commands like a grant, revoke. So grant will allow us specified only for the users to perform the specified task. So only those users going to be access to that while granting the access. Similarly, the revoke, you want to be revoke or you want to be cancel the previous granted accesses to the user, then we can be revoke them. So as we already learned some of the different languages, we can also expect to understand the different domain constraints and also the integrity constraints and the referral integrity constraints, and what are the different key constraints we had in the DBMS, and how does this users going to modify your database without disturbing of your data consistency, and also the constraint that going to be used specified in the DDL commands like alter, create command. We can also select several different types of the constraints like domain constraint, entity integrity constraint, referral integrity constraints, and key constraints we are going to be showcased in this class. So let's go and check out what exactly the domain constraints we have and what are the different domain constraints we are going to be shown in this class. So domain constraints are basically user defined column that will going to be helpful to the user. I mean the value according to the data type whatever we had. And if this encountered the wrong input, it gives to the message to the user that column is not fulfilled properly. So if you say in the other words, I would say the attribute that going to be specified, all the possible values that attribute can hold like integer, character, date, time, string, etc. So it defines the domain or the set of the values for an attribute. It ensures that the value taken by the attribute must be atomic value, cannot be divided further. So we cannot decompose it further. So at the time we can call it as an atomic value. So from its domain knowledge. So let's go and check out some domain constraint. What are the different domain constraints we are going to showcase? So the data type we already seen integer, character, date, and time, string wise, decimal or floating, etc., etc. So similarly, constraints wise, you can say we have to specifically we are going to be stick with some of the constraints. It's going to be very helpful. Not null, unique, primary key, foreign key, check, default kind of the constraints we are going to be show. So let's also go and check out what are the different domain constraints and how does that going to be helpful. Let's go with the not null first. So not null consists of you have a data set. Suppose you have a data set with some of the values are not present with respect to the null values. So I will quickly show you how does that going to be helpful in the real world. So you have a data set which consists of some rows. Let's take some rows, around 10 million rows you had, and the column wise you had around 30 30 columns or 40 columns. So what will happen at the time you have this number of the rows and this number of the columns, it may be having some of the null values, some of the null values for any column, you can say, whether it is a different data types, that does not matter, but it hold maybe some of the null values. The data may be mismatched at some point. So at that time you realize to understand these not null is going to be constant very helpful. You don't want to, you need to avoid the null values. Basically, you can say you don't want to, that much of business of the values or business of the data, inconsistency of the data. So for that, we have to unassign some of the values. We can assign to some missing values attribute. So in the machine learning, it is a very appropriate step you have to do in the data cleaning and the pre-processing steps. So in the SQL side also, we can also try to understand how to retrieve the data by using the non-null constraints. So that will be going to be restricted a column to not accept the val values, which is going to be restricted to field of always contain a value which may not be, you cannot be insert any new record or update the new record without adding the value. So if you take some example called employee related database, so what will happen, employee must have a some name associated with it. So I'm just creating a table. We already discussed this, how to create a table and how to insert the some of the values. I'm just creating a table by using the create table employee. So employee is a table name and employee ID is a column name with giving the data type varchar 30, giving some